sacrificing one's son. So we understand that the son had to die. When we understand what took place between Jacob and Esau, Esau was the elder. Now, according to tradition, the elder son is supposed to receive the inheritance. So when we understand what was given, the portions of the earth were given to Israel. When we look at Esau, and it says the shaggy he-goat, the devil. So when we're talking about the devil and vanity and sin and the displeasing, we got to understand that Jacob, who was the younger brother, they were different. So when we look at these twins and these stories of these twins, we have to understand death and life, but we have to also bring it back to the understanding of natural forces and the elements, that how this knowledge transitioned into language, into writings, into dating, into calendars. So when we see the Sagittarius and the Sage and the he-goat and Goat Mountain and the Baphomet, we have to understand the baptizing and the ocean and this renewal or this repentance and the crucifying of one's flesh, right? And the dying at the end of this 270 degrees of this constellation of the Sagittarius is during the winter solstice, when the sun dies for 3 days, and the next 3 days it rises again. So we understand this story, but understand how this inheritance, when we look at Esau and Ish, right? And Esau being Adam and Adam. So when you see here the earth and the primordial mound and the mother Rebecca who tells her son Jacob how to steal this birthright. So we have to understand how Israel took portion of the whole earth by taking also Esau's portion. So when we look at Edom in red and India in these regions, understand this was the region that was taken. So when we look at Narmer's palette and some of these ancient things, when we see these Asiatics crossing over, you have to understand that when we look at the invasion of Mongoloids or cave dwellers, troglodytes into these cultures, the Aryan invasion, you got to understand Esau and the Horites and Seir and the Satire and the he-goat and Sagittarius. And during this time where these Horites are these people that dwelt in these northern regions, right, were in this time of darkness without light, and why they began to worship these different rain deities, understanding for survival. So when we look at the Sagittarius, so when we look at the Sage and the manipulation of Aleister Crowley and the Baphomet and the goat to be an scapegoat, to be a replacement for, instead of the offering of one's behaviors or self as the example of being renewed in walk of life. See, this is what these universal shamans or priests had to be embodied of, not only of the death and burial and resurrection of the actual son, but they actually had to walk in the uprightness, and that required, when we look at the subtropics and the subplanting and the subplanter, these regions of the subtropics, this is why we call Jacob the hill catcher or the subplanter, and how he took these regions, right, from Esau to leave the Horites. When you understand the Horites in the polar circle, so the Horites in the polar circle in these regions above the subtropics, we understand Jacob and Rebecca telling Jacob how to steal Esau's birthright from him. When we understand Esau's name, Ish, when we look at Asia and the fire and the ring of fire and this coastline of the other side. When we look at the Sagittarius, we have to understand that the Sagittarius is what forms this, what they call the prime meridian. So because Jacob took the subtropics, we can see the invasion not only from the troglodytes and the Mongolians on this side coming through California, but also in East Asia as well, and into these regions of the Naga serpent. So when we see here this ocean, this great basin of this great ocean, and we look at the time of the Sagittarius and these islands, when we look at the Baphomet and how Aleister Crowley and all of these Satanists tried to take this stellar mythos and form it into this satanic ritual, we're talking about the killing, the death and life, and the duality of good and evil, right? And we're talking about the procession of death into life and this calculating of time. And it's how the ancients understood how they needed to behave in uprightness and perfection in different angles of geometry. So when we see this coast here, the Scorpio coast, and you see the Sagittarius and this line, we understand the Archer and the King's Court, or this marker of the death of the sun that takes place during the winter solstice, that's in concord, connected with this cord that goes through Ghana and West Africa through the line of Cancer. So we understand the Concord, or the King's Court, the Congo, in this region of 0 degrees to 180, which formed this location of the New World. So when we look at this Baphomet and the deities, and we look at baptism and the renewing, and we understand the Indios and the Indies, from the West Indies to the East Indies, this process of whether the sun dies to be renewed again within these borders, within these parameters of this great Shin, when we understand this 120 degrees west to 240 degrees east to these regions. So when we look at the Sagittarius, which is from where we find the 150 to 180 of this last constellation, which is 240 to 270, which they have in some of the zodiac tropical constellations, of how they do some of the zodiacs or what have you. But when we see here this mythos, these things were done to calculate time, and this is how the ancients told time.